Chapter 2. The Blade of a Father. Do you recall when I wrote that perhaps this journey would not be as dreary as I had thought it might be? With a glimmer of hope and foolishness, I looked onto our second day of travel with a lightness in my heart and a spring in my step. The beast had followed me dutifully, stumbling along through trees, though slightly steadier now as we came out of the mountains and walked onto solid ground. I could not have been more hilariously mistaken. For a while, the journey was truly fine, but the burning behind my eyes had persisted regardless of the water I drank. No tears came, and even when I blinked, I was offered no relief. The very movement of my eyelids felt like sand against my retinas, scratching away at the barriers which guarded my soul. I had never been one to complain, and I had no interest in allowing our travel to take any longer than absolutely necessary. But by the second evening of our trip, I found myself writhing in agony while the beast built a fire. He regarded me oddly, seeming hesitant to speak, but prodding me nonetheless. "What's the matter?" he asked, for once lacing his voice with gentle concern instead of disinterested, flat affect. The expressiveness of his question filled me with rage, and I tossed a handful of dirt in his direction, knowing I missed my mark due to my temporary blindness. "My eyes," I spat back, having little else to say. I had no clue what the cause was, only that wasn't true. I knew perfectly well why my eyes were filled with such virulent pain, but something tugged my will to speak of it out of my mouth and back into the annals of my psyche. It was only a dream, I thought, imagining myself untouchable. It can't hurt me. It was a fearful sort of desperation forcing me to convince myself that I was fine. I could hear him stand from the small fire he'd lit. The dry leaves and twigs under his feet crackled just as loudly as the ones in the fire, seeming to echo throughout my skull and hammer even more pain into my eyes. In between my groans, I heard him take careful steps towards me. I would have shooed him away, but I'd gradually lost my will to be a nuisance. I don't know what I had expected him to do. Something in my distraught state led me to believe that he was going to timidly ask to see my eyes and use his expertise to diagnose and cure me, or otherwise tenderly lift my hands away from my face and scrutinize my pain with the dedication of an apothecary. However fleeting, there was a clear image in my mind of this infuriating man regarding me with gentle care rather than disinterest. I had no idea what made me think such horrendous thoughts. Instead of catering to the hysterically convoluted visions my imagination had conjured, the beast coldly wrenched my hands away from my eyes and glared at me. My vision was quite limited, but I could see rage and unrest in his expression. A faintness gripped my insides like a hand wrapping around my heart and slowly clenching it between speared obsidian fingers. The thing... My head flashed hot with fearful pain. The thing is holding my heart. What happened next remains hazy in my memory. Fear blurred out my rational thoughts, and the last thing I remember, or perhaps the last thing I imagined, was the beast spitting bitter words in my ear. "Your eyes are turning to sand." I found myself at a slighter height than I was used to, rising only to the mid-thigh of the man beside me. The world around me was so damn big, hazy, whimsical, unknown, but at the same time frightening and filled with dangerous uncertainties. My small hands gripped the loose fabric of the man's pants as I hid behind him, fear plugging my throat and keeping me from speaking. His large, warm hand tousled my hair. I looked up to meet his face. I knew that he was smiling, a forced, painful grin, but all other detail eluded me, from the style of his hair to the color of his eyes and the cadence of his voice when he spoke my name in gentle care. Perhaps it had simply been too long for me to recall the finer details of this interaction, or maybe the memory was so bad that I'd forced it unwillingly out of my mind. My eyes trailed back over to the subject of my unease. Someone was shouting. Yet again, I could make out no details. A sharp-faced old man was yelling at the warm one beside me, some indecipherable weapon in his hands. It glinted silver, tossing the sun's rays back into my eyes with overtones of blue and white. Strange, I remember thinking. That isn't like any silver I've seen before. He was pointing the weapon at my father. That was right. The man I clung to was my father. And shouting about some issue that I also couldn't make out. It was as though I was watching the scene around me through a glass case which blurred all detail and muffled all sounds. Beside my father, I suddenly took notice of the large, hovering thing cloaked in black and ever imposing. A distant thought tugged at the back of my mind just for a second. That's the thing that's turning your eyes to sand, but it quickly faded. That wasn't my memory, not in this moment. Though it was odd. For all the detail I'd forgotten, the thing was crystal clear. How could I have possibly forgotten that I'd seen it before? And here of all places. My father said my name, but his voice was too distorted to make out. His fearful grin didn't waver, and his next words were clearer. I would like you to run, and don't look back at me. Without my control, I ran, my little legs carrying me as fast as they could. These actions belonged to a different me than the one watching them, so I had no control over the scene. Knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have looked back, but I was foolish and naive back then. What I saw next was a scorned man plunging whatever manner of blade he had taken with him into the chest of the man who raised me. An explosion of scarlet stood out vividly against the black robes of the thing as it reached its hands out for my father. Something ethereal and intangible moved from my father's corpse into the blackened hood of the thing. It then turned to me, leaving the murderer and his victim, my father, behind. I clenched my jaw and prepared myself for death. Casting a glance back at my father's corpse, I realized that I was now myself. Not as I had been all those years ago, but as I was now, tall and sure and far stronger than the child who looked back. As its stony fingers reached for me, I glared all my fiery rage into it. I was entirely prepared for death at its hand, yet some cursed part of me spoke before I could think. "Why don't we call it a draw?" I asked, and it stopped short of grabbing my head. "Back then, you were there when my father died." I began my monologue, not even certain that this thing understood, nor that this memory was entirely real, but continuing nonetheless. "And now, I've survived your purge of my village. Why don't we call it even and go our separate ways? You can always try to kill me later, but get the hell out of my head." I wasn't sure what was emboldening me so. It could have been that I was delusional with fear, or maybe I just knew that I had nothing left to lose. I had nothing to gamble except for this fragment of a memory, so I did. And, like a handful of sand blowing away in the wind, the thing faded from in front of me, once again leaving a small toddler to mourn their father's death in solitude. A cry wrenched itself from deep in my chest, lighting my throat ablaze. After I stopped, the guttural sound echoed off of the trees around me for several long seconds, letting me hear just how horrifically I'd screamed. I covered my mouth behind my frigid hands, hoping to never make a sound like that again. Just what had gotten into me? "You're awake?" A voice, the beast, spoke from beside me. The words were ridden with shock and awe, though the tone was nothing compared to the look on his face. I could have laughed if the memory of my dream hadn't been so ingrained in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about my father's last words to me and the man who killed him. Had that truly happened? Had the thing been there? Or was it all a delusion from its presence in my dreams? The beast was eyeing me like I had 3 heads. Not just 2, but 3. He was pretty damn shocked. As I took in our surroundings, I noticed that I was not in the same place I had been when I fell asleep. We were further from the mountains and closer to the city, nearly by a whole day's travel. Silently, I wondered if he'd really carried me all this way. The beast never failed to confuse me in the most obnoxious of ways. One moment I was recuperating from my confusion, and the next, his foot was colliding with my jaw. The smooth leather of his shoe hit me square in the cheek, sending me keeling over into the ground. I hissed with pain, my hand coming up to cradle my face. Up until now, the beast hadn't shown a hint of violence, so why start kicking me now? "You've been toying with me this whole time, haven't you?" he roared, standing over me. He suddenly looked very different than he had in the time I'd known him. Gone were his wistful, mindless expressions, which were so easy for me to throw punches at. His light-hearted idiocy had all but disappeared into the wind, blowing away with the same brevity as the thing when exiting my dreams. "What the hell are you talking about?" I growled out as I sat myself up, cradling my now bleeding nose. He didn't seem to hear me at all. He merely kept speaking as if he had some great point to make. "This explains why you didn't grieve for your village. I wanted to believe that you were someone different who'd somehow survived that ancient monster, but now I can see that you're just harboring it," he said darkly, an edge of utter hatred in his voice. "Beast, just what the hell are you talking about?" I screamed, my gaze alight with rage. "Stop pretending," he demanded, advancing on me with careful, even steps. I scrambled back, letting the cascade of blood fall freely down my face now. Even as it dribbled down my lips and stained my shirt, I made no move to reduce the flow. Eventually, it would stop on its own. This will pass. With my eyes fixed on the man above me, I felt my back connect with the tree. I had an image in my head of a massive oak, towering and ancient and groaning in the wind, but when I turned, I found myself leaning against nothing but a dead stump. "Do you want to know what I dreamt about this time? All you need to do is ask, you scary prick," I snarled. This only seemed to fan the flames of his rage as he reached under the jacket of his suit, pulling out a piece of metal which looked like some kind of hilt. It was dirty and rusted, but it caught the sunlight in the sparse sections where it was clean, showing its otherworldly silver gleam. It was a gleam that I could never forget, the same gleam of the weapon that had killed my father. How did the beast have such a thing? At the moment, I hadn't a clue. It was too improbable, too large of a correlation to my past to be mere coincidence. The world was so damn big, after all. At least, that's what I'd thought as a child. In times like these, with infamous beasts roaming around and ancient intangible beings consuming remote mountain villages, the world could actually be quite small. And suddenly I was in the same position as my father, standing against a scorned man with his intangible weapon. Although invisible to me at the moment, I could feel the thing hovering nearby, its shadowy gaze penetrating my soul. It glared into me. Someone who would dare speak in its language and make deals with it like some street gambler. Someone who dared to survive. I realized then that there was something different about my situation than my father's. I was without someone to protect, and therefore, there was nothing to keep me from being reckless. Now that the beast was close enough to touch, I stood up quickly, serving him my firmest uppercut. He fell on his ass, surprised but not seeming injured. I should have known as much. After all, I'd tried to attack him once before, and he deflected me with ease. However, I had never landed my attack, and no matter the amount of inhuman defenses, I figured my next move would have to hurt at least a little. While the beast was dazed from my punch, I kicked him in the balls, finally satisfied with my revenge for his fish theft upon our first meeting. Fortunately for me, he sucked in a pained breath, cradling his mishandled groin and writhing in pain for a moment. I felt a wavering grin across my face, content with his pain. In his temporary proneness, he dropped the hilt to the ground, and I snatched it quickly. The metal felt surprisingly warm in my hand, and I could detect a slight hum coming from within it. As I squeezed it tighter, an ethereal white blade appeared, turning the object from just a hilt into a bladed knife no longer than my forearm. While not an intimidating weapon in form and size, there was something unnerving about it to me. There was no longer any doubt in my mind. This was the very weapon that had been used to kill my father. With our positions reversed, I stared down at the beast. I could kill him now, I thought, figuring that it would be better for my safety if he wasn't around anymore. If I didn't have to worry about this horrible, clumsy, foolish man trying to kill me, maybe I'd be able to sleep better at night. But the dream still haunted me, and as I took the form of the scorned man with the blade, The beast took the form of my father. Falteringly, another thought crossed my mind. What if he has something to protect? And so, we stood frozen for a while. I could still feel the thing watching me. Its anger had given way to a stifling curiosity, and I now felt as though I was under the glass being observed for a damned reaction. What is it that I'll do under pressure? Making demands seemed like a good start.
You're gonna tell me exactly what the hell's going on, or I swear to the North that I will kill you.
I wouldn't, but he didn't need to know that. As the beast came out of his pain, he rose to his knees, his expression wary and uncertain. There was still hatred in his eyes, but it was tempered by doubt. Something he was very sure of a few moments ago was no longer a certainty. Good, I assured myself. Must mean I'm doing something right.
You're the thing. It's possessed you and taken you over from within. Hasn't it?
He asked, sounding as though he hoped he was right. I felt heat fly to my cheeks as I turned red in anger. That was why he kicked me in the goddamn face?
You're a fucking idiot,
I snapped, still holding the blade towards him. He backed away from the white glow of the blade, seeming uneasy around it. I decided to keep leveraging my advantage.
This seems dangerous. You were going to use it on me when you thought I was the thing. I assume that means it can kill you, too, I said, and the fearful glimmer in his eyes told me that I was correct. But this is impossible, he cried, steeling his anger against me once again. You escaped from the thing once when we first met. It's not possible to escape it twice, he explained, sounding more like he was trying to convince himself. A long silence passed between us. It seemed a natural part of how we conversed now, buffering our words with long stretches of nothing. It made me feel more secure that we were both thinking before we spoke at the very least. At last, quietly, he asked, "How did you do it?" Finally, I lowered the weapon and the blade disappeared, but I still held the hilt firmly in my grasp. I didn't want the beast to get too comfortable. I made a deal, I said softly. His resulting glower told me that my answer was unsatisfactory. It was there once before, when I was a child. In my dream, I saw a memory. The thing watched my father die. It was about to kill me, too, I think. But I asked it if we could call it even. He looked shocked, maybe even abhorred by my response. My father died on its watch, so I should be allowed to live for now. That was my argument to it. I explained, knowing I was giving too much detail, but I left out the important parts. I didn't mention the weapon or the fact that the thing had collected something from my father upon his death. I also didn't mention the extremity of my fear or the fact that I had been ready to die before some unknown will moved me to speak. Those details would be mine alone. It's still gonna try to kill me, I think. Maybe. But I told it that I wanted it out of my damn head. That explanation seemed like enough, according to the sudden guilt on his face, so I threw the hilt in my bag, keeping it away from the beast for now. I reached a hand out to him, and he slowly took it, his eyes full of uncertainty. As he got to his feet, I shot him another glare, finally wiping the blood from under my nose. I was sure it was staining my teeth and chin. I must have looked monstrous, but I couldn't bring myself to care. If you ever hit me again, I'll do more than just kick you, I snarled, marching off towards the south. We needed to keep moving on our journey, and I wouldn't be prevented from continuing on towards the city. So, what exactly is it? I asked. After a full day of walking after our fight, we were nearing the city. We'd managed to find our way onto the main road, where we stomped onwards towards civilization. My stomach felt ill at ease from the thought of being back around so many people. After such a long time away, I wasn't sure that I could handle it. Not that I had any other options at the moment. With nothing to run back to, I had no choice but to press on. What? Came the beast's clueless reply. At least he was back to his dumb self. His kicked puppy attitude had begun to put a damper on my mood. That sword you have, what is it? I was sick of not knowing, and if my friend had any answers, I was going to get them. Yeesh, it's kind of a long story. Boring, too. he said, seeming avoidant. Glaring forward into the road, I plunged an arm into the bag at my side, rummaging around until I found the metal hilt from before. It was still warm, far warmer than the other iron tools in my bag. Once I found it, I held it up, glancing back at the beast and waving it in the air slightly. "Does it have something to do with the thing?" I asked. He rushed forward, nervous all of a sudden. "Put that away! Do you know what could happen if someone else sees that?" "So what is it?" "Something magic, right?" I had heard of magic before, but it was rare to see it around here. Northern Hentan was its own nation, isolated from much of the rest of the world by a range of nearly impassable mountains. The only way to go around was by sea, but it remained frozen a grand majority of the year. It was quite rare for southern sorcerers to pass through, and even rarer to dig up ancient artifacts that held any hint of magic. "Yes, from the Balt." The name was so familiar to me. Centuries ago, they'd gone to war with Erisardo, although they weren't simply colonizers looking to claim more land for themselves. Erisardo had been a land full of things like magic and mystery, and the Balt had gone to war with them to steal it. The battles of the Balt, being one of the most well-known wars around, ended in the complete erasure of Erisardo, its people, and its culture. "How did it survive the war?" I asked, curious as to how such an item ended up with the beast instead of locked away in the magical archives of the Balt. He grimaced again, casting his glance away from the road. "It's another long story." My eyebrows furrowed in irritation. There seemed to be many long stories surrounding the beast, but I would assure him that we had plenty of time for talking.